Hey there, guys. Welcome to episode 3 of the Storyteller's Art, my video blog for this week and my entry. Thanks for everybody. This has been a fantastic week, by the way. I've managed to come up with the idea of my poetry collection, which everyone's been talking about. In fact, the cover's actually been the best one ever designed and got the best feedback I've ever seen. So thank you, everybody, for helping me achieve that, by the way, because I'd just like to take a minute because I got some fantastic feedback online, and it led to me coming up with a fantastic cover, which is just really excellent. It's the best cover I've ever made, and it's all thanks to the feedback I got from people and the ideas they gave me, which helped me to create that. Plus, obviously give Joe a mention this week as well, because we've started work on a collaboration project which has yet to have a name. I think it's running under the operating name of Sable at the moment. It's going to be let's say, it's going to be somewhat of a biblical Christian type book, but also a supernatural type thriller set in today's modern world as well. We're still fleshing it out, but it's taking a very interesting sort of direction at the moment, and it's just something we came up with from from flash ficking together. I'd set him some exercises for doing the whole show not tell. As you know, that's kind of important when you're writing, to do a lot more showing than telling, and I was giving him some exercise, and he challenged me to do my bit after he'd done his bit, and I just fitted in with what he'd been saying, and we came up with something utterly different to what both of us have been originally playing, but what we both had sitting around in the recesses of our heads. So hopefully this collaboration will bring up something quite interesting. We'll wait and see here. But let's get straight on in. I will mention, of course, that my poetry collection, the Bleep You Poe, Quoth the Raven Bleep You Poe, is coming out on December 20th. It's fully on schedule for that release, and we're going to come up with some fantastic stuff for that. I really am. I'm looking forward to it. It's going to be a festive Christmas type book, or at least it's being released then, but let's just say it's not as festive as most people would like to think, but it is talking about Christmas perhaps in a way people should give it more consideration than they currently do. It's kind of pointing out what Christmas become rather than what Christmas should be in some parts. In other parts it's going to be an exploration, a real exploration of the human mind, and some of the poetry is going to take you to some places maybe you don't want to go, but you're going to like it. I can tell you that much for sure. It's going to be an excellent collection of poetry I'm going to put together. And the cover is just beginning. The poetry, a lot of it is already there. I'm going to maybe do a few more pieces over the next coming weeks before release, and I may do something right at the very end. But we will see in either case how that works. But let's just jump straight on in to the promised third lesson in my art of the storyteller, where we talk about language. Now, as you know, language is everything in a book. How your characters speak, what kind of language they use, whether they swear profusely, whether they don't, whether they have a regional accent, whether they have an accent at all, whether they speak English, whether they speak a completely different language, whether you're representing in English a language that is other, like I am doing in my books. In my books, everyone is speaking what is called hegemonic standard Greek, because in my world, Alexander the Great did not die, therefore the Roman Empire never existed. Therefore, all the Latin influences that we have in our modern languages, including English, never happened. And all those influences were Greek, Persian, and other influences instead. And as I mentioned, the hegemonic standard Greek came from the Koine Greek, which was formed by Alexander's army when they were entering into Persia, when all the disparate nations of Greece at the time, before Greece became a unified country, under the hegemony that Philip II, Alexander's father, started, everyone spoke their own versions of Greek. They had the Macedonians, who spoke their own very unique form, the Athenians, who spoke what was considered what we would call today the King's Greek. We had the Spartans, who spoke their own, and as things moved on, and through interaction and through habit, a different kind of Greek called the Koine formed up, and from that I developed what was called the Argot, where we have, let's say, maybe 200 or 300 different languages, dialects, and forms of speech all came together to create a unique language. And this just happened naturally. It just osmosized, I suppose, if that's a word. It happened by osmosis, that all these languages that we had Tibetan, we had Greek, we had Indian, we had Persian in all its different forms, we had Celtic, we had everything came together to form one unique language, which was finally formalized and written down, as Sham likes to call it. Nothing is real until it's written down, to become a proper language. And there are jokes Alexander had to learn it so that he could speak it and therefore be a proper representation of his people. I also like that idea as I used it because it's a way of emphasizing and excuse me, I'm still getting over a bit of a cold. If I keep clearing my throat, I apologize. I used it as a way of emphasizing, highlighting, and pointing out the idea of the hegemony. If anyone read my article about hegemony on the blog the other week, that's what I was talking about, the idea of hegemony, that Alexander's hegemony is an idea of everybody being equal within his empire. They're all under one hegemon, they all follow the laws and the rules of the hegemony, but they all contribute equally to it. And the fact that the Argot, which grew in the army in its many multitudinous forms, was put together and formalized, they weren't seen as the invader, they were seen as the changer, because people recognized their language in the new language. They recognized their customs and their culture in the new culture. So what happened through the hegemony is that everybody, including the supposed invader, changed to create something entirely new. And I loved that idea, and I wanted to find a way that I could represent that. And the Argot hegemonic standard is the way that I did that. How people speak, how you see people's speech changing throughout the books, gives an idea of that. And Neshar is used as the example. Obviously, he starts speaking Persian and then speaking very, very, very bad Greek. And there are some, I have been told, hilarious examples of that. We have Yeshua ben Yoshua speaking in Greek at the beginning as well, when he first appears, and his Greek is, shall we say, a little bit stilted because he's still learning. But he is trying to pay respect. But then you see throughout the stories where he appears, his language changes. And that's because he starts using the Argot, or the standard, which incorporates bits of his language too. Because his language and his nation are part of the rising hegemony. So it makes the changes, and I see a great, great influence, a great, great importance in how one represents language. Different languages and the cultures that create those languages have a great influence on the story itself. There's a couple of examples. One example I use first of all is the obvious one, which is J.R.R. Tolkien and the Lord of the Rings and all of that universe. He, through his creation of Middle-earth, invented a number of different languages. He had the Elven languages, he had the Orcish languages, he had the Western language of the human beings, and the language of the dwarfs and everyone like that. He represented those in great detail, and even had songs, poems, and tracks spoken in that language to distinguish his characters. That elves would speak occasionally in Elfish, or whichever language there is. I didn't research that in too much depth. I think it was Sindarian and High Elvish and things like that. The dwarves had their language. There was a dark speech of Mordor, which the orcs spoke. There was a different speech which the Isengard orcs spoke, which was a combination of human and orcish, I believe, I can't remember. And that had a great deal of influence. The way things were described, the words that were used. Another person who's done it is J.K. Rowling. In her books, she introduced different pieces of language that the wizards used for their world and the human beings did not use in theirs, which helped to clarify, distinguish and represent the thing as an other. I think that's important. And another example I will draw is someone from my home country, my home city of Belfast, even though I don't sound at all Northern Irish to you, because I grew up in England in the 70s and a Northern Irish accent, excuse me, I've got an itch on my ankle, sorry. In my time, having a Northern Irish accent in England was not something a young boy should have. And I received a lot of bullying in school because of it, and as a result, unfortunately, changed my accent. I wish I hadn't. I wish I still had my old accent, but what can you do? But going back to Roddy Doyle, he wrote many people will have seen the movie Commitments, and he wrote another number of stories, all set in Belfast, and he decided to represent all dialogue phonetically written in the Belfast way of speaking, in their slang, in their manner. And as one read it, if one read it either aloud or in their head, they would be reading with a Belfast accent, which added authenticity to the book. It made it Northern Irish, it made it unique. And it also made it fun. There was fun in trying to read that. Now let me use another example. I remember the first time I read Chaucer. You know, Geoffrey Chaucer, the Canterbury Tales, I had to read it at school. And I thought I was going to hate this, because it was in a different language. It was in what is called Middle English, which is the, shall we say, the transitory speech between modern English and Old English. Old English being a combination of a lot of Germanic languages, a lot of Irish languages, a lot of Celtic languages, the Saxon, the Angle, and also influences such as Latin and French and other languages. Middle English was kind of the period before English was formalized and people just wrote it how it sounded. And I lived and spent a lot of my time in an area called Birmingham, in the centre of England, or Birmingham. Americans may know it as a place that Ozzy Osbourne comes from. And that's why Ozzy speaks like, yes, Ozzy is fried out of his brains as well, and has his very mumbly manner of speaking, but he does speak with a Birmingham accent. I discovered something when I was reading Chaucer. If I read Chaucer out aloud to myself in a Birmingham accent, it made complete and utter sense, because that is the area of the country Chaucer was from. Chaucer was from that area, from the area that was known as Mercia at the time, or became the West Midlands later on. And he wrote down his language as it sounded. He made it authentic to his time and his place by his language and the speech they used. And once you get it like that, that book is ridiculously funny in parts. The Miller's Tale, oh my good lord. If you haven't read it yet, read it. It's very, very funny. It's rude, it's disgusting in parts, but it's also very, very funny. And also uses some words that really we shouldn't use. They will offend people. But they're written in a way that if you read it literally, you don't know what they're talking about. But once you figure out the accent, suddenly it makes utter sense. And then you realize, what did he just say? Did he really just say that? Yeah, he said that. And many who've read my books may realize I do use profanity a fair amount in my books, which is odd for someone who speaks about being Christian and is currently in the process of writing a Christian book with a good friend of his. But it's authentic, because my characters are all former soldiers, or still soldiers. Alexander grew up as a soldier. He was raised that way. He was educated later on and knows how to speak properly, but when he's around other soldiers, he's going to talk like a soldier. He's going to default to army. And anyone who's met career soldiers knows that career soldiers, they use profanity a fair old amount, especially in the presence of other soldiers. And so I kept the profanity in, because that's how they speak. You may have noticed Sham my one character who is not a soldier, who is a complete opposite of a soldier, who is, to, if were you to listen to him, a complete coward, but he's not. He just thinks he is. He speaks a very different way. He very rarely swears. He'll use words like bugger and bloody and things like that, but he very rarely drops F-bombs, as my other characters do. Calyadis and Lupanakis are notorious for their F-bombing. Nesha is notorious for his F-bombing when he's upset, and for swearing in some very creatively interesting ways. Alexander will swear in the company of his friends. And I kept that in, I represented it, I wrote it that way for authenticity. How can you write about soldiers and not have them talk like soldiers? Yes, there are ways, and there have been discussions on some of the groups I belong to in Facebook over this week about other ways to represent it, but I felt, for the purposes of authenticity, have them speak like they would speak. I went to great lengths. In fact, poor Lysander, who is one of the characters, he doesn't swear, and he speaks in a very formal, poetic, prose type manner of speaking, what we would consider oldie-worldy English. He will speak and he will talk and he will say, but he denied me access, he prevented my egress from the chamber. He did not allow me to speak in an adequate fashion, in a manner befitting of his station. And so I was refused access unto his domicile. Because he's an Athenian, and the Athenians invented what we consider modern Greek in many ways, and considered themselves a little bit more advanced and more cultured than the other members of the Greek family. Macedonians, especially the Athenians, considered the Macedonians to be pig farmers or goat farmers. Hence the many comments made towards Alexander and his amorous activities with goats. That was how the people of the day would have referred to him when they were confident with him, and how Athenians especially, and other more cultured Greeks, would have referred to Macedonians. There were also jokes made about Nesha and pigs, because pigs were also, many considered a common staple in parts of the Persian Empire. So a lot of research and a lot of thought and a lot of consideration were involved in how I made my character speak. People make jokes because, as far as I made Sham speak, I gave him the idea of I based him on the idea of a British Indian. Someone who speaks very good English as an Indian, but still has their very Indian manner of phrasing things and saying things. I made jokes about it before. Kalanos, as someone who's purer Indian and older perhaps than Sham himself even is, speaks in a slightly older way. And he speaks the way many who've lived in England would know about old men Indians, who came to England and learned some English but kept many of their roots and much of their culture, how they speak. So there are a number of different ways one can use language. One can either use very, very formal, correct, proper, well-enunciated and well-spoken English, with that kind of Laurence Olivier kind of accent, go very Shakespearean, yay! One must speak correctly, one must express oneself, one must gesture openly when one is speaking. Or you can just speak pretty normally like I do all the time when amongst my friends. Even when I'm speaking amongst other English people, I sound completely different when I'm speaking amongst people who are not of an English origin. I vary my English, and we all do it. We all, dependent on the circumstances, speak differently. When I'm doing something like this, or if I am doing a presentation, if I am speaking on the phone at work to Americans, if I am in a public setting, either for my books or not, I will speak in a different form of English than I would amongst my friends and my family. Clearly, there are things that you don't do in certain settings. Same with your characters. How your characters speak reveals a lot about them. An awful, awful lot about them. And not only does it reveal a lot about them, but it reveals a lot about the circumstances and the scene and the location they are in. If I have someone who's speaking and, very much like effing blinding, joking about, laughing, having a laugh, talking like this, doing all this sort of thing, he's chilled, he's relaxed. He's among friends, he's enjoying himself, he's probably had a bit to drink. If he's speaking much more formally, much more correctly, and much more properly, then he is perhaps not as relaxed. He is perhaps putting on a persona. He is perhaps comporting himself in a different fashion. He perhaps doesn't feel comfortable around the people he's with, like Lysander. Lysander is... he joined the army, but he would rather not have done. He realised later on that perhaps he should have been doing something else. But he was made a Dracogorath, or the same. The dragon saw in him something vital, something important. Of course, what happened to Lysander has a big factor in that. Think about what happened to Lysander, what was done to him, how he suffered, and how he is and who he is, and the impact he has as a person was why I picked him quite intentionally, and why I chose to represent him in a certain way and put him in certain scenes and have people speak to him in a certain way and interacting with him in a certain way has a lot to do with the impact of his fate, of what took place to him and what they did to him. That has a big factor in why I represented him that way, and you too need to have, in the way you make your character speak, how you have your characters comport and represent themselves has a big factor on how the reader will react to them, how the other characters will behave around them, how the other characters will be with them, how natural they will be, how stilted, how distant, how aloof and standoffish they might be. If you have all of your characters speaking the same way, in the same voice as we did touch upon when we dealt with voice initially, it will have your audience see them differently. It will have your own characters see them differently than perhaps if you found a way to make their manner of speech unique, the language they use, the way they represent themselves. This is why I decided to, even though I have devoted an entire episode already to the voice of the character, that's why I decided to devote another episode to the language of the character. Because language is vital. Language is important. Think about it. Take a moment, I'll wait, and think about, if you have a scene of dialogue written in one style of language, and then you write the same scene of dialogue in a different style of language, tell me how different that is. And I'd like to give that to you as maybe a little homework assignment this week. Write the same dialogue, write one in formal, write one in relaxed, write one with profanity shown or implied, and one with maybe a few culturally unique words thrown in also. And tell me how different that scene becomes. The same conversation, the same people, different ways of representing it. Tell me the difference. Tell me how different that comes out, because I can guarantee to you it will come out very, very differently. So excuse me, I do have to go. There's a few things going on, a few people I have to catch up with. I will get this out next week. I actually haven't decided what we're going to touch on, but I am going to, I believe, talk about structure, talk about ancillary and avenues in your works, and also how to do things such as parallel writings, character studies, novellas, short stories, how to develop character. In fact, that's what we're going to do. Next week, we're going to talk about character development. So, again, thank you to everybody for all the feedback, the fun, and the games we've had this week. I've enjoyed it. Keep your eyes out. December 20th, 2017. As soon as the sun rises, Quoth the Raven You Po will be out. Get ready for it. It's going to be interesting. You're going to enjoy it a lot. It'll be on Amazon, all the usual channels, plus be aware, keep your eyes open on my website. That is going to be https://cyclebiker2.wix.com/Alan J. Fisher. Keep an eye out. There are going to be some interesting offers and deals, maybe even a freebie or two for Quoth the Raven You Po on that webpage. Keep an eye open. Anyway, it's been fun talking to you guys. It's always fun. The group is growing, the following is growing. Anybody who has any questions on anything I've touched so far, who wants to talk, drop me a direct message, drop me an email. AlanJFisher0@gmail.com, or just drop me a direct message on the group, or to my personal Facebook page. I will respond as quick as I can. I'll help you out. I've got plenty of time. I do not charge a dime. I believe I've been given this gift, and it is my duty to share it the best I can. So, have a great week, guys. Time for me to go. We've gone way over our time this week. Take care. Love you all. Enjoy.